Radio Cairo, and this is World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and we're coming from Studio 3. And today, in the World of Info, it is the world of books, and we are here with you for 1 hour. So, in this day, we are going to present 3 interesting books that deserve to be read. The first book is Midan Safir by Samir Fuad, or The Safir Square. The second book, غادة لبيب تحت سطح العالم 60 يوما في أستراليا, Down Under 60 Days in Australia by غادة لبيب. And the third book, which is also a very interesting one, is Geir Anderson, The Life and Afterlife of the Irish Basha by Louise Foxcroft. So let's start right away after the break with the world of info and the world of books. Stay tuned. So let's start right away in the world of info with the world of books. And today is a very interesting book that we're going to start with. Safir Square by Samir Fuad, or Midan Safir. Well, this is a very nostalgic book. And anyone who has lived in Heliopolis or lived part of his life in Heliopolis like me definitely will feel a lot of nostalgia when he reads this book. Because Samir Fuad is a very distinguished painter. And he has his own school of painting. But he was not, as a start, as a personal painter, as a professional painter. He was an engineer, a communication engineer, who was born in 1944 and learned and graduated from the Faculty of Engineering in Ain Shams University and worked as a communication engineer ever since then in the 60s until he resigned his post in 2001 and decided to become a full-time artist and painter. And he is really very fond of painting that he decided to quit his job as an engineer. However, this beautiful book is talking about his apartment that he was born in the 40s, and the fact that in this apartment he has lived with his parents, and he was one of the young children of this family. He has a sister, 2 sisters, and a brother. One of these sisters got married and then died from an illness, and the elder brother, who was 14 years his senior, was also having a lot of interest in art, but he went to the military academy and then to the Air Force Academy and became a very distinguished pilot. And he got married later on and have children. But unfortunately, he was martyred in one of the wars of Egypt in 1967. And for him, he was his mentor, and he's the one who taught him how to paint and how to become very much interested in art. Another important figure in his life was, of course, his father, who was also a very talented artist himself, but he was a graduate from Leonardo da Vinci Museum and Don Bosco, and he was working as an inspector of technical schools, and therefore he belonged to the upper middle class family. He got married and decided to take the apartment in Safir Square in Heliopolis. And this very particular square is very famous in Heliopolis. Everybody who lived in Heliopolis or know Heliopolis knows this beautiful square that has used to overlook a lot of beautiful gardens in the middle. Nowadays, there is a big bridge inside, but still Samir Fuad has this apartment, and he, in spite of living in the Gulf area, still goes to this apartment to do his paintings every day. And therefore, this apartment, he has seen a lot out of it. He has written this beautiful book in nostalgic tribute to the apartment, to Heliopolis, and to this area that he lived in. The apartment or the building belonged to several owners, and the people who were living there have changed by time. Sometimes they would come and leave, and he has decided to write about these different families that lived and of course the fact that some of them had children of his same age, and therefore he had the chance to play with them, to become a friend with them, and to enjoy his life with them. He also has gone to the school in Khulafa Rashidin school, also in Heliopolis, where he used to walk from his home in Safir to this school that was part of his primary education. And later on, he went to Masr Gedida secondary school after that, from where he graduated. He was very much interested always in art and in painting, but his father was always afraid that he would not continue his education, but he usually had very good scores. So his father accepted this hobby of his about painting. He also was very much interested in classical music and jazz music, and he was a big friend of one of the very famous jazz players, Yahya Khalil himself. And his life in Heliopolis was always a very nice life. He would go around, walk in the streets of Heliopolis, meet a lot of his friends, pass by them, have a talk with them, and they go to the different cinemas that there were placed in Heliopolis, enjoy eating sandwiches from famous restaurants, and gives us an idea about Heliopolis that no longer exists. He talked about Groppi, he talked about Charinos, the famous shop that was later on replaced by another important, one of the big chains of the famous fast food companies that has taken up this place of the patisserie. The book is full of a lot of vivid pictures that he has taken out from Safir Square, and definitely shows the difference that happened through the years with these areas, and how he has gone and lived in Heliopolis. He told us also about his membership in Heliopolis Club, where he still goes to this club up till now, every day or almost every day, to meet his friends. He's lucky that most of his friends from his childhood are still his friends up till now, and this makes them very interesting life to have such good friends who are continuously having this friendship for a very long time. He also talked about the habit that his father did, that every year he would take him to have a photograph of himself in his birthday, on the day of his birthday. And this habit, his father took care to do it every year, and until he was 16 years old. And this makes it very special. His encounter with cycling, his encounter with the little naughtiness of different styles of his life is also very well noted. He also tells us about his visits to downtown with his parents, whether he goes to the famous cinemas or the air-conditioned cinemas, and he's also he tells us about how he has seen himself the burning out of Cairo in the 1952 incidents in January, and how he has seen that. And of course, he tells us and still remembers the pictures that the life, his visits that he used to go to the countryside, the village where his mother or his father had his sister living there and marrying the mayor of the village that used to be their village. But his father and two of his siblings have got their education in Cairo and decided to stay in Cairo. He talked as well about his uncle, the famous Ahmed Said, the director of Sawt al-Arab and the founder of Sawt al-Arab. All this gives you an idea of a lot of nostalgia. the pictures that are thrown all through this book are really very interesting. And one of them, for example, is showing him as he was playing on a violin in the 60s, how he was very much interested in music and that he taught himself music and he went to have music classes. And even he had the chance to visit Al-Aqad, who was also living in Heliopolis, quite near to his home. And he would go there on Fridays in the famous day that the visiting day of Al-Aqad, where he would start and giving sort of short lectures, and people would start talking to him and giving him questions. So all this makes him really an interesting person to travel. And he finished this book with a lot of beautiful paintings of his paintings. And as you can see, when you see this book, you'll find the number of paintings that he has drawn are really very interesting. It shows you the big talent of this gentleman, and at the same time, the lives and times of Heliopolis. A very nostalgic book and written in a very beautiful prose. And although it's a bit short, but yet the important thing is that because he's an artist and a painter, you can feel the use of the photo. You feel the use of the photos that really have helped to convey the message of the nostalgia of this beautiful book. A beautiful book by Samir Fuad, Medan Safir, Safir Square, talking about Heliopolis that does not exist anymore and yet still lives in the lives and the times of people who lived it, saw it, and cared to see it. So let's talk about, take a break, and then we'll come back with this, our second book of today. Stay tuned always to Radio Cairo. So you're still listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK, and Dua Muhammad is still at the control. And yes, the second book of today is a very interesting one. It is by Dr. Ghada Labib, a dentist that has dedicated a big part of her life to reading books and spreading culture, which is definitely a great thing to do. The book is called Down Under, 60 Days in Australia. And this is a very interesting book. So let's talk first about Dr. Ghada Labib. Dr. Ghada Labib has one brother, and the name of her brother is Dr. Amr Labib. He's a physician and a surgeon who immigrated to Australia almost 20 years ago. And he is married to an Egyptian lady raised and born in Australia and has children, and they're living there. It was the tradition of Dr. Amr Labib to visit his parents while they were still alive almost every year, and he would bring his children with him to see his parents and stay with his sister as well. His sister, who is married and living in Cairo, has this beautiful hobby of reading and trying always to spread the knowledge of books. And she has a group that is on Facebook, which I always would like to ask our dear listeners to follow this beautiful page. It's called The Book Garden, where she not only presents books that people read, but also she brings on writers to talk about their books, and she always helps to be the moderator and the anchor person of these beautiful meetings. So she decided to visit Australia with her passing away of her parents. So she had more time now to come to go and visit her brother, a long-awaited visit. And she decided that she would leave temporarily her husband and her two daughters and go to Australia on her own for a long vacation and a long trip for 2 months to see Australia. And in Australia, there was this beautiful encounter with her brother and her sister-in-law and his children. And they are living in Perth, a city that is on the west of Australia. And it was a very long trip from Cairo to Dubai, and with a short layover in Dubai transit, and then going to Perth. Perth is the city where her brother is now working as a consultant surgeon of endocrine surgery, a very eminent surgeon and a very successful gentleman. His family are very much interested in learning Arabic and getting to the knowledge of Arabic, and at the same time, he still has his roots in Egypt. So for her to visit Perth, she went around and she started visiting every single place in Perth. Not only did she visit Perth, but also she visited Melbourne, which is a city that her brother used to work in for quite few years, that he even had his an apartment or a house there that he didn't sell, and therefore, so they have a house in Melbourne, and therefore they usually visit because Melbourne is a bigger and a more beautiful city, and it's called the artistic city. So she went to Melbourne and stayed there, and at the same time, after that she visited Sydney. And in her visit, she decided that she's going to do everything by the book. She decided to go and see everything possible. She saw the museums, she saw the zoos, she saw the gardens. She even had the chance to visit Cirque du Soleil and described it in a very vivid way. And at the same time, she was greatly stunned by the fact that in all these museums and all the places of interest, whether these were in Perth or in Melbourne or in Sydney, there were always guides who were retired people of Australia who would volunteer to show the tourists, whoever these tourists are, maybe they are Australians or visitors. These will show them these places or museums or buildings or parliament buildings, and they are doing this for free to keep themselves busy and to keep themselves with their mind more or less occupied. And this makes it a very interesting idea that hopefully people can get use of their times and still having an active, busy life. So this was her encounter with the positive thing about Australia. The fact that everybody is integrated in Australia, and the fact that the immigrants are welcome and they are sharing in their lives, cannot really conceal the important part or fact of history about what happened to the Aborigines, who are the original people who lived in Australia for almost 65,000 years. We know, of course, the story of Australia, that Australia in the beginning was occupied by the Brits, and the Brits decided, because Australia is so far away, to export to it some of the most notorious criminals as a sort of an exile to live in Australia. This was the start. But later on, people discovered that Australia is really a very heaven-like place to live. And people started to immigrate to Australia. And since more than 200 years, there were not a single criminal being sent to this exile to Australia. And so some of the very, very few ancestors of some of the people were originally criminals, but other people have come with immigration waves that happened all through the history. In the beginning, they were immigrants coming from Europe, but then later on in the 70s and 80s, people started to come from different places, and the 60s from different places in the world. Of course, Egypt is included, and the Arab world, a lot of Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, Egyptians, of course, that could reach maybe 200 or 300 million. And the population of Australia nowadays is 27 million. So let's talk about for a minute or two about the Aborigines, because in the 19th century, the Aborigines tried to regain their control of their lands. And of course, because they were underarmed and therefore not well equipped, they got defeated and got humiliated. And the humiliation went on when they tried to resist the invaders or the occupiers of their country. Sometimes in the 50s and the 40s, there has been a law that would, for example, force the government wanted to integrate all the Australians in the all the Aborigines in the Australian society to be carefully knitted. And this, of course, was one of the methods was to kidnap the children of the Aborigines, put them in sort of orphanage in spite of their parents being alive, and the government would raise them away from their parents so that they don't have an influence on them. Of course, these harsh measures, which stopped in the late 60s, have taken a big scar that the Australian government since the 70s have put always in the motto of any meeting is the fact they insist to show that Australia or the government is completely supporting the freedom of the original people, and that it is always apologetic of what they have done to the Aborigines. So by time the things are getting better in the treatment and in the help and in the care of the Aborigines. Also, this not only attracted their attention, it also attracted their attention to see the different aspects of wildlife, especially the animals that she has that they don't live outside Australia, for example, like the kangaroo or the koala or the famous emu bird, which are very special for Australia, and even their penguins are totally different than the penguins that we can see in Antarctica. So when we talk about the book, we find that it is a very decent book that takes us and is full of a lot of details. I listened to an interview that she had with one of the channels of Australia about how that she has written a lot of notes and that she has had a lot of videos and photos of her visit to Australia. And added to this, she has decided after she came back that she would write notes about this visit, and then these notes were expanded in this beautiful book of prose. And she also discussed how she visited the book clubs, whether these were in Perth or in Melbourne, to see for herself and to discuss books. And she brought with her some Egyptian books and Arabic books to dedicate to the different libraries in Australia. So this was really a very nice trip. And this book reminds me of a very beautiful book that I read quite long time ago, and it was published by a journalist. His name is Salah Tantawi. Salah Tantawi has written a beautiful book that was published in 1976 in Iqra, and is called 500,000 Minutes in Australia. And yes, 500,000 minutes are almost 347 days, which is the period that Salah Tantawi lived in the 60s in Australia. He was working in Cairo, and he has a sort of what we can call the fear or the urge to leave when he succeeds in a certain procedure. He was a successful artist and a painter, and at the same time he was living in Cairo. Then he had a big fight with one of his directors in his work, and therefore he was transferred to Upper Egypt. And the world suddenly blackened in his memory and his eyes, and he decided that he is going to get an immigration. And so he applied for a visa of immigration in Australia, and this was in the late 60s, 1967 or 68. And at that time, things were much easier than nowadays, and so he got an acceptance to travel to Australia. There he started from scratch. He worked in the beginning as a sort of a worker in one of the stores. Then he was able to find a post as a painter in one of the companies of an artist who paints and finds a lot of engineering and architecture plans, and he was successful in that. And also he ended up as becoming one of the accountants in the tax collection administration. And this was in Melbourne. And Melbourne, as we have known from the book of Ghada Labib, is also a city of art. And there he found that there was a big community of Egyptians who were living there, and Arabs who are really missing the Arabic theater. And so he made a company of Arabs and Egyptian amateurs to do work and to do plays. And he made two beautiful plays of Rod al-Farag and Said Darwish, and he became very famous and started gaining money and knowing stability. But as he said always, that he has the urge to leave or to do the self-destruction of success. So after 347 days of Australia, he went back again to Egypt, where he stayed in Egypt and has written about 4 or 5 other books. But this book is an interesting book. If you find it, you can read it. It's on the net as well, and it's called 500,000 Minutes in Australia. So 2 books today in one about Australia, and I think the new one by Ghada Labib is very technical and very beautiful, and telling us a lot, an experience of a visit to a family visit. And the other book about an Egyptian who traveled and immigrated and succeeded, and then he came back because, not only because he felt homesick, but suddenly losing the urge or losing the interest and going back to where he started to start another new start. Interesting books. So stay tuned to us with us here in the world of info and the world of books, and we'll after the break, we'll come back with our 3rd book of today. So you're still listening to the world of info, and today is the world of books. And yes, this is a very interesting book to finish up for today. It's Geir Anderson, The Life and Afterlife of the Irish Basha, and it's by Louise Foxcroft. So let's start by talking who's Louise Foxcroft. Well, Louise Foxcroft is a prize-winning historian and Royal Literary Fund Fellow at Magdalene College, Cambridge. She has published 6 books and has appeared on television and radio. And she is a very talented writer. And she has decided to write this book about Geir Anderson using his memoirs and his personal journals. So who's Geir Anderson? Geir Anderson in Egypt, in Cairo, at the Ibn Tulun Mosque, you'll find a beautiful 2 houses attached together, and they are called the House of the Kritli. Inside this house, which is very well kept, is a museum that used to be the house of this strange but interesting man by the name of Geir Anderson. Geir Anderson is an Irish descent British officer. He was born in 1881 and died in 1945. To summarize his life, we can go on forever. He was an Egyptologist, a poet, and a surgeon, a soldier, a psychic, and a noted collector. And she has tried to use his memoirs and his personal journals to present to us a picture of Geir Anderson. And we will, as we go through the pages of the book, we'll understand why Geir Anderson stays and lives in our lives of today. As a child, he crossed an unforgiving America with his entrepreneurial and eccentric Irish parents. As a man, he immersed himself in the Arab way of life, as colonials seldom did. He saw ghosts and witches, sailed the Nile, wrestled Turks and crocodiles, fought at Gallipoli, smoked even opium, performed surgery in the desert, gathered and cared for artifacts in his Cairene home, survived an assassination attempt, and in the name of science, he even boiled the flesh from the skulls of Nuba warriors. His personal journals are filled with frank accounts of his exploits and of his illustrious and colorful people who wandered by. For example, Lawrence of Arabia, Gordon, Kitchener, Conan Doyle, Eric Gill, and Stephen Spender, among others. So This is in a mixed tale of two wars. Who is really Geir Anderson? Well, Geir Anderson definitely is an interesting man. His vivid interest in Egypt and collecting artifacts really, he had this interest, and even he bought a boat that was docked near his house at Ibn Tulun, near the Nile, in the Nile near his house. And at the same time, he has took with the important idea of being very much interested in collecting artifacts. But how did he start? He, as we said, he traveled in America and he was a collector, and he is really have seen a lot, and definitely part of his life went through working as a doctor in the army, joining the armed forces in the medical corps, and this was in 1903. And being a doctor, he had the chance to work as one in very distinguished units. He was later transferred to the Egyptian army in 1907, and then he was promoted to become a major in 1914, and then during the same year, he became Assistant Adjutant General for recruiting in the Egyptian army. In 1919, he retired from the army to become the senior inspector in the Egyptian Ministry of Interior, and he later became the Oriental Secretary to the British Residency in Cairo. And he retired in 1924, but continued to live in Egypt, expanding his interest in Egyptology and Oriental studies. This is a very interesting point. The fact that he was living in this time of 1919, where there was the revolution, the fact that he was working with Kitchener, who, as we know, was he himself the High Commissioner of Britain, and therefore he knew Kitchener. Of course, he was then, later on, Kitchener became the chief of the British Empire forces, and then he died in 1916 when when the ship that he was on in the North Sea was torpedoed. So he knew Kitchener quite well, and he knew, of course, Lawrence of Arabia, because Lawrence of Arabia came very frequently to Egypt, and in 1921 there was the famous Cairo conference, and at the same time he was the senior, he was an adjunct to the High Commissioner at that period of time, so he knows Lawrence of Arabia quite well. We are very much interested in the period after his retirement, because at that time he dedicated his life to collecting artifacts. And these artifacts included all the extremes of artifacts that can be possibly known. He went to the different bazaars of Cairo, started buying with a thrift everything that he could reach for his exotic taste. And he was very much involved in buying ancient Egyptian pharaonic artifacts and, of course, Islamic art. And then he was able to take up this beautiful Kridleya mosque, Kridleya home in Cairo, and start to renovate it and let it be easily inhabitable for the 20th century. And this was in 1935. He was given the permission to stay in the house and renovate it. And when you go and see this beautiful house or the museum, you will notice the great exotic taste of Geir Anderson, and at the same time the different facts or the different artifacts that he was able to collect through the years. So after the break, we'll talk about the house and how he was able to renovate it, and what can we see in this house of Kridleya or the Geir Anderson Museum. So stay tuned to us. So you're still listening to the World of Info and the World of Books, and we are talking about the life and afterlife of the Irish Pasha, Geir Anderson. And yes, this is the book that we're talking about, and we're talking about the house, or the house of Kritleya. Beit al-Kritleya is considered to be one of the remarkable examples of Muslim domestic architecture in Cairo. It dates back to the Mamluk period in 1631 AD, which extends from 1040 till 1631. And it was built by Hijri and after Christ. It was built by Hajj Mahmoud Salim Galmam al-Ghazar. The museum, which is two houses, consists of two houses built using the outer wall of the Mosque of Ibn Toulon as a support. The larger house, located on the east, the outermost side in relation to the mosque, was built in 1632 by Hajj Muhammad ibn al-Hajj Salim ibn Galman al-Ghazar. It later came into possession of a wealthy Muslim woman from Crete, and the home became popularly known as Beit Kritleya, or the house of the Cretan woman. The second house to the west, the innermost side in relation to the mosque, was built in 1540 by Abd al-Qadir al-Haddad. It later became known as Beit Amna bint Salim, after its last owner. The two houses were joined by a bridge at the third floor level at an unknown point, and are both collectively known as Beit el-Kritleya. The construction of the private home against the outer wall of the mosque was common practice. In 1928, the Egyptian government began to clear these homes, many of which were in very poor condition, away from the mosque, as a part of a plan to make important Islamic monuments more accessible. The Committee for the Conservation of Arab Monuments objected to the demolition of Beit el-Kritleya. However, on the ground that the home was well preserved, the home was kept intact, and repairs were made to the side walls to strengthen them after the neighboring houses were torn down. And here, in 1935, Major Geir Anderson, the retired collector, comes to play on this theater. He described himself as Orientalist, and he was granted through his connections a permission to reside in the house, which had just been restored. Geir Anderson oversaw the installation of electricity and plumbing, and the restoration of fountains, pavements, and other parts of the interior of the home. He populated the building with his personal collection of art, furnishings, and carpets, and he built a sailing boat he used to collect these antiques from all over Egypt. It was docked on the Nile not far from the house. In 1942, Geir Anderson was forced by ill health to leave Egypt, and he gave the contents of the house to the Egyptian government. And King Farouk gave him the title of Basha in return. Geir Anderson died in England in 1945 and was buried in Suffolk. And just to note, of course, that James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, was partially shot in the museum in the ceremonial reception hall and the rooftop terrace. So this gives us an idea about this strange house. And that's why the house is still keeping the two names. The name of Beit Kritleya, because this was his last owner. And the second important point is that Geir Anderson was responsible for its restoration. But why the house survived was till to the 1928 decision of the committee to keep the house and not to demolish it. The house was kept in position, and then when the Geir Anderson came to live in it for his final 7 years in Cairo, he was able to restore it and allow the water and electricity to pass in. The experience of visiting this house is one of a lifetime. You will definitely enjoy visiting it. You will definitely feel that you really have gone suddenly to the medieval period. The inclusion of ancient Egyptian artifacts beside Islamic, Syrian, and Turkish, and all this stuff can really show some exotic taste, but still you feel that it is really in place. Perhaps the way that the life that Geir Anderson have lived can definitely be shown in the beautiful things that are really around us in this museum. The gratitude that we feel that the government gave him the chance to live, and then the fact that he returned this gratitude by not selling his collection or not trying to export it, and maybe because it was the war. I mean, 1942, it was really quite interesting that he was able to travel amid the war in Europe. 1942 was the year that he left Egypt, and definitely he went back to England by sea. So he survived this trip, but he left all his artifacts in the possession of the Egyptian government. And these artifacts were well kept, and the name was given to this house to be the Geyer Anderson Museum. And therefore, it is really a very interesting place to see. So we see now that the book is telling us that the book, the house, the owner of the house, and the collection are all the same, the Geyer Anderson, or how he lived after his death, because everybody who comes to Ibn Tulun Mosque, which is one of the oldest and the most beautiful kept mosques in Cairo, will definitely pass by Geyer Anderson Museum and have the chance to go suddenly in a capsule of time to the 16th and the 17th century to see for himself a museum with a collection and belonging to an exotic, strange man. So, after the break, we'll talk more about books.